Next tip when you're thinking about proving identities or verifying identities is that there is often more than one way to work a problem. More than one method can possibly work. And here's an example that I can, off the top of my head, I can think about working this two different ways. First of all, you might choose, since some of your thoughts are to rewrite things that aren't sine and cosine in terms of sine and cosine, we might choose to work on the right side of this equation and rewrite cosecant as 1 over sine of theta and cotangent as cosine of theta over sine of theta. Then you see you've got a fraction, two fractions with the same denominator, and you can add those fractions together. And that's exactly what the left side is, so we're done. The other option, of course, is to work on the left side of this equation. So if we have, again, I'm going to copy the problem, 1 plus cosine theta over sine of theta equal to cosecant of theta plus cotangent of theta. If I look at that identity and I choose to work on the on the left side, I can split that fraction up as a sum of two fractions, 1 over sine of theta plus cosine of theta over sine of theta. 1 over sine of theta is cosecant theta. Cosine over sine of theta is cotangent theta, which is the right side, so we're done. All right, next tip. Often, if you've got fractions, adding or subtracting those fractions is a way to get started on a problem. So you want to make sure that you remember that when you add or subtract fractions, you have to have a least common denominator, or you have to have a common denominator. So if we're going to prove this identity, I look at that and I see that there's more. It certainly looks more complicated on the left side of that equation, so I'm going to choose to work on the left. And I'm going to start by working on getting a common denominator. The least common denominator is going to be the product of sine of x and the quantity 1 plus cosine x. So I'm going to multiply the first fraction by sine of x over sine of x. And the second fraction is going to get multiplied by the quantity 1 plus cosine x over 1 plus cosine x. So we have sine squared of x plus the quantity 1 plus cosine of x squared all over the product sine of x times 1 plus cosine x. So thinking about what we might do next, I think I would probably recommend squaring that binomial 1 plus cosine x and seeing what happens. And okay, then regrouping. I see a sine squared and a cosine squared. Not really sure. There we go. If I think about adding those two terms together, That, that's going to be 1 according to our our Pythagorean identity. So just to make sure that we don't lose anybody in the process, sine squared x plus cosine squared x, I'm going to show what I'm regrouping. So sine squared plus cosine squared is 1. Add that to the other one that's up there, and you've got 2 plus 2 cosine x now in the numerator. And the denominator is sine of x times 1 plus cosine x. Okay, now I'm going to scroll back up because I've kind of forgotten what I'm trying to get here. All right, so the right side, I'm trying to make the left side match 2 cosecant x. All right. Since cosecant is 1 over sine, the sine that I have in the denominator is a good thing. What I'd like to do is get rid of the 1 plus cosine x. Well, notice that the two terms in your numerator have a common factor of 2. So if you factor that out, now you can reduce, leaving you with 2 over sine of x, which is 2 times the cosecant of x, which is what we needed it to be. So some of these identities are going to take several steps. Just be aware of that. You're not always going to be able to verify an identity in 2 or 3 steps. Sometimes it's going to take more. And I would really recommend writing down more than you think you need to. That way there's not going to be any question for me when I go back and look at your work. I won't be confused about what you did. It's also going to be really helpful for you when you go back and look at the problems that you've worked already. It's a good, you don't want to have to sit there wondering, well, how did I get here? So kind of a rule of thumb is, when in doubt, write it out. So show me the work. All right. So you just need to practice. So give this one a try. Cosine of x over 1 plus sine of x equals 1 minus sine of x over cosine x. All right, now this problem, the two sides of that inequality are very, very similar. I don't look at one and automatically think, oh, well, this is complicated, I can simplify it and make it look like the other one. So in this case, you just kind of get to pick where you want to start. I'm going to work on the right side of this equation, just to be different. A lot of the problems I've worked on so far do work on the left. So I'm going to work on the right side. And here's kind of what I'm thinking about. I know I would really like the denominator of the fraction on the right here to have a 1 plus sine of x in it. So I'm going to take the right side of this equation and I'm going to multiply by 1 plus sine of x over itself. When you multiply those two binomials in the numerators, you're going to get 1 minus sine squared of x. The denominator then is cosine of x times the quantity 1 plus sine of x. All right, and 1 minus sine squared of x is the same thing as cosine squared of x. So I'm going to change that numerator. Okay, and that comes from the Pythagorean identities that sine squared plus cosine squared equals 1. So if you move the sine squared over and change its sign, you have cosine squared equals 1 minus sine squared. So that's why that's okay to do. Then reducing the fraction, I've got a common factor now in the numerator and the denominator. I can reduce that fraction. Leave me a cosine of x in the top and 1 plus sine of x in the denominator, which is exactly what I needed to show that we could get. So that is equal to cosine of x over 1 plus sine of x. Alright, one more example. Secant of x plus cosecant of the opposite of x, all divided by secant of x times cosecant of x equals sine of x minus cosine of x. All right, this identity I'm going to work on the left side. And the very first thing that I see is all of the angles in this problem are x except that one. So I'm going to use the odd and even identities to rewrite cosecant of negative x as negative cosecant positive x. Cosecant is one of our odd functions. And then next, I think I'm going to rewrite these in terms of sines and cosines, because what I'm trying to get has just sine and cosine in it. So secant is 1 over cosine. Cosecant is 1 over sine. And that's divided by the product of 1 over cosine times 1 over sine. And actually, I think I will put that together as one fraction in the denominator, 1 over the product, cosine times sine. Alright, I'm going to invert and multiply. So I'm going to take the fractions that I have in the numerator, 1 over cosine x minus 1 over sine x, and I'm going to divide by 1 over cosine sine, which is the same thing as multiplying by cosine times sine. And we'll flip that bottom fraction over and multiply it. Now distributing, cosine of x, sine of x gets multiplied by 1 over cosine, and cosine of x, sine of x gets multiplied by 1 over sine. Reduce where you can, and we are left with sine of x minus cosine of x. And I really hope that's what I was supposed to get. Yes. Now, a word of caution with problems like that involve fractions: do not try to write so small and cram something like this on one line of paper. You need to use at least 2 lines of paper there, maybe 4. Again, the neater you can be, the easier it is for me to grade, the more points you're going to get, and the easier it's going to be for you to go back and look and understand what you did when you go back and look at your work. So be very neat. And obviously I'm not perfect, and I wouldn't expect you to be perfect either, but if you're working on the left side of the equation, try to work straight down the page so that the equal marks pretty much line up. Now obviously down here where the lines got a little bit long, I got off a little bit, but that's okay. I'm still the farthest thing to the right on each line where I'm writing is the equal marks, until the very bottom line when I've got the whole equation. This takes practice. You're not going to get them every single one you try, you are not going to be able to get it figured out the very first time you try it. So what you've got to do is work the problem, get a good eraser because you're going to be erasing a lot, plan on using a good bit of paper, and just be patient. Work the problems. If you can't get them, leave it, go on to other things, come back and work them some more.